The bell rang, but it wasn't the sound of class starting that caught her attention. It was the empty stomach of one of her students. The lunchroom buzzed with the usual chatter, the clinking of trays and the hum of students excited to escape the confines of class. But in the back of the room there sat a quiet figure, eyes fixed on the half-eaten lunchbox of his neighbour. A thin boy barely making it through the day, his face pale and his hands trembling ever so slightly. Mrs. Thompson, a teacher who had been at Jefferson High for over 10 years, noticed him immediately. She had always had an eye for the ones who hid their pain beneath the surface. The ones who tried too hard to blend in, to act like everything was fine. If you want to know what happens next, how a simple act of kindness turns into a life-changing journey for Mrs. Thompson, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us for the rest of this heartfelt story. You won't want to miss what happens next. She had seen this boy James countless times before, his worn-out backpack, his hollow gaze, his desperate attempts to focus in class despite the distractions of a tired body. She'd learned to read him like an open book over the last semester. But today something felt different. Today she could feel the weight of his hunger pressing down on him, the struggle clear in the way he stared at the food he couldn't afford. Mrs. Thompson wasn't the kind of teacher who turned a blind eye. She knew the school system wasn't perfect. There were students who came from families who barely made ends meet, families who couldn't afford to feed their children every day, and James was one of them. She had noticed how he tried to make it through the day, his eyes lighting up when the bell rang for lunch, only to dim once he realized he had nothing to eat. But today, it seemed more noticeable than ever. James wasn't just hungry, he was starved, not just for food, but for the care and attention that so many students took for granted. Mrs. Thompson's heart sank. She knew she had to do something. She couldn't just let him go on like this, pretending everything was fine when it was clear that his stomach was crying out for help. She had always been the kind of teacher who believed in more than just the lessons on paper. She believed in the importance of kindness, of helping the students who needed it most. "James," she called gently, her voice cutting through the noise of the cafeteria. The boy looked up startled, as if he hadn't realized anyone had been watching him. His cheeks flushed, and he quickly looked away, embarrassed to be caught. "Are you okay?" she asked, her gaze soft but insistent. For a brief moment, James hesitated. He didn't want to admit that he hadn't eaten since breakfast, that his stomach had been growling louder than the teacher's voice, but it was too obvious. Mrs. Thompson had known all along. "I'm fine," James mumbled, but the words rang hollow. Mrs. Thompson smiled warmly, a comforting gesture that spoke volumes without saying a word. She knew better than to press him further. Instead, she looked down at his empty tray. The usual excitement in his eyes was absent, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that seemed to speak louder than any words. Mrs. Thompson turned away for a moment, her mind racing. Her heart knew what needed to be done, and she wouldn't let this moment pass by without offering her help. After all, this wasn't just about food, this was about showing him that someone cared. With a quiet nod to herself, she made a decision. "I'll be right back," she said, her tone warm but firm. "You stay here." As she walked to the cafeteria line, her mind was made up. She was going to buy James lunch. It wasn't much, but it would be something. Something to let him know that even in the toughest times, he wasn't alone. This simple gesture, however, would be the spark that set a much bigger chain of events in motion, a chain of events that would soon change her life in ways she could never have imagined. The cafeteria buzzed with chatter and clattering trays, but Mrs. Thompson's mind was far from the noise. She walked to the counter, her gaze fixed on the lunch line. Her wallet was light, but that didn't matter. She wasn't going to let James go hungry today, not if she could help it. She scanned the menu, mentally calculating what she could afford with the few dollars she had left. A sandwich, a juice box, and maybe some fruit. Not much, but it was better than nothing. "2 lunches, please," she said, her voice steady but filled with purpose. The lunch lady raised an eyebrow but didn't ask any questions. It wasn't unusual for teachers to buy extra lunches for students every once in a while. As she paid, Mrs. Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that she was doing something small but incredibly important. She could already see James's face light up when he saw the food. Maybe it wasn't just about the food. Maybe it was about showing him that someone noticed him, that someone cared enough to do something about it. Carrying the tray of food, she walked back to the table where James sat, still staring at the empty space in front of him. He hadn't noticed her coming. Mrs. Thompson paused for a moment, wondering if she should say something or just set the tray down in front of him. Without a word, she slid the tray toward him. His eyes snapped up, wide with surprise, then quickly shifted to the tray of food. He blinked a couple of times, almost as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. I didn't ask for this," James stammered, his voice low, hesitant. He clearly didn't want to accept the charity, but Mrs. Thompson could see the hunger in his eyes. She knew the hesitation wasn't about pride, it was about not wanting to burden anyone else. "You didn't have to ask," she replied softly. "It's just lunch, and you need it. Go ahead, eat." James hesitated for a second longer before his hand slowly reached out to take the sandwich. Mrs. Thompson watched him, her heart aching as she saw him take a small, tentative bite. The boy devoured the food almost instantly, as though it had been days since he'd had anything to eat. "Thank you," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. But Mrs. Thompson heard it, and that was all that mattered. As she stood there watching him eat, she realized something. This wasn't just a simple act of kindness, it was an opportunity to change someone's life, to make them feel like they were worth more than just a forgotten face in the crowd. She smiled and turned away, giving him the space to eat in peace, but inside she felt a warmth spreading through her chest. She had done something good, and in that moment, it felt like the right thing to do. But little did she know, that small act of kindness would set off a series of events she wasn't prepared for. The next morning, Mrs. Thompson sat at her desk, trying to prepare her lessons for the day. The classroom was quiet, the only sound the faint scribbling of pencils on paper as her students worked through an assignment. It was just another routine day, or at least it was supposed to be, but as the clock ticked toward the end of the period, she noticed a shadow standing at the door. It was Principal Walker, his usual stiff posture framed in the doorway. Mrs. Thompson hadn't expected him so early. He rarely came to her class unless it was for something important, and important in his eyes often meant troubling. "Mrs. Thompson, may I speak with you for a moment?" he asked, his tone formal, his expression unreadable. She stood and walked over, her heart skipping a beat. What could this be about? She'd been careful not to overstep her boundaries. Buying lunch for a student wasn't something that should have caused any problems, or at least that's what she thought. "Of course, Principal Walker," she replied, trying to maintain a calm demeanor. They stepped out into the hallway, away from the ears of the students. The moment the door clicked shut, Principal Walker turned to her with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. "I've been informed," he began, his voice cold, "that you bought a lunch for one of your students yesterday. James, I believe?" Mrs. Thompson's eyes widened. She hadn't expected him to know so soon. "Yes, I did. He was hungry." "Do you realize the implications of what you've done?" he interrupted, his voice sharp. "You use school funds to buy food for a student. This is not how we run things here. We have policies for a reason." Mrs. Thompson blinked in confusion. "I wasn't using school funds. I paid for it myself. I just wanted to help." Walker's eyes narrowed, a frown creasing his forehead. "That doesn't matter. The fact remains that you went beyond your role as a teacher. You're not here to play the role of social worker. And now I'm getting complaints from the school board about personal expenditures. This behavior is unacceptable." Her heart sank, but she tried to remain composed. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble, I just thought it was the right thing to do." "The right thing?" Walker scoffed. "The right thing is following the rules. You've set a bad example, and I'm afraid I have no choice but to let you go." Mrs. Thompson's mouth went dry. She didn't understand. She had always done her best to help her students, to make sure they were seen and cared for. Why was this such a big deal? Why was she being punished for showing kindness? "But I didn't break any rules. I just bought him lunch." And you've broken a moral code, Mrs. Thompson. You're not here to solve every child's problems. You're a teacher, not a charity worker. I'm sorry, but I can't let this slide. Effective immediately, you're fired. Her mind spun. Fired? For helping a student? It didn't make sense. How could this happen? Wait, you can't be serious. I didn't do anything wrong. But Principal Walker was already walking away, leaving her in the empty hallway, alone and devastated. His footsteps echoed, and all she could do was watch him disappear into the distance. How had things gotten so out of hand? She stood there numb, trying to wrap her mind around what had just happened. Was her kindness really such a crime? Mrs. Thompson stood outside the school, the sound of Principal Walker's footsteps still echoing in her mind. She couldn't move, couldn't think. Her heart was heavy, weighed down by confusion and betrayal. How had things spiraled so quickly? How had she gone from helping a student to losing her job in an instant? The injustice felt suffocating. She had spent so many years pouring her heart into teaching, into caring for her students, only for it to be thrown away like it didn't matter. It wasn't about the lunch. It wasn't even about the money. It was about the kindness, the simple act of showing someone they weren't invisible. How could anyone find fault in that? With a heavy sigh, she walked away from the school, her footsteps aimless. She wasn't sure where she was going, but she didn't care. The world seemed like a blur, the people around her just shadows as she passed by. Her feet eventually carried her to a small cafe tucked on the corner of the street. It was a quiet place, a little oasis where the hustle of the world could be forgotten for a while. Mrs. Thompson stepped inside, her head hanging low, her shoulders weighed with the weight of everything that had just happened. The barista glanced at her as she walked to a corner table by the window. Mrs. Thompson sat down, not bothering to order. She just needed a moment to breathe, to try to make sense of the chaos in her mind. She stared out the window, watching the world go by, feeling like she was stuck in a story that didn't belong to her. But then, as if the universe had decided she needed a sign, the door chimed and a figure walked in. Mrs. Thompson didn't immediately recognize him. Her mind was too clouded with anger and frustration. But then he turned slightly and she caught a glimpse of his face. Her breath caught in her throat. Keanu Reeves. It couldn't be. Why would Keanu Reeves be in a place like this? He walked up to the counter, his calm presence almost surreal in contrast to the chaos of her thoughts. She watched as he ordered a coffee, his voice soft but steady. He wasn't famous here. He wasn't the movie star people fawned over in the tabloids. He was just another person in a cafe, seemingly just like anyone else. Her thoughts scrambled. She should leave, she told herself. Leave before this surreal moment grew any stranger. But instead she found herself sitting there, unable to take her eyes off him. She was caught between the pull of reality and the strange, undeniable feeling that something bigger was about to unfold. And then, as if on cue, he glanced over in her direction. His gaze locked with hers for a brief moment, a quiet understanding passing between them. Mrs. Thompson quickly looked down at her hands, suddenly aware of her disheveled state. She didn't feel like she belonged in this world anymore. She was a failure. Her world had crumbled, and now she couldn't even hide from the embarrassment. But then, to her surprise, Keanu stood up, walking toward her table with the same calm demeanor. He didn't rush, didn't seem out of place. It was almost as if he knew exactly what to do. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, his voice warm and inviting. Mrs. Thompson's mind raced. What could she possibly say to him? She had no idea why he was here or why he'd even acknowledge her. She was just a teacher who had made a simple mistake. But before she could stop herself, she nodded, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Keanu sat down, the silence between them comfortable, but heavy. Mrs. Thompson wasn't sure what to say, or if she should say anything at all. But the moment felt different. It didn't feel like an ordinary encounter. There was something about him that made her feel like, for once, maybe things would be okay. "I don't mean to intrude," he said gently, his eyes soft, "but you look like you could use someone to talk to." Mrs. Thompson blinked in surprise. How could he possibly know what was going on in her mind? She barely knew him, Yet here he was, offering a piece of comfort in the midst of her turmoil. She hesitated, but only for a moment. I just lost my job," she finally said, her voice faltering. "All because I bought lunch for a student." Keanu's expression softened further. He didn't look at her with pity, but with understanding, as though he had seen this kind of struggle before. "That sounds unfair," he said quietly. "You were trying to help, right?" Mrs. Thompson nodded, her throat tightening. "I just wanted to make sure he ate. I don't know. I just couldn't sit there and watch him starve. But now, it's like I've done something wrong." Keanu didn't say anything at first. He just sat there, his gaze thoughtful. "Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't always lead to the right outcome," he said, his voice filled with a quiet wisdom that made Mrs. Thompson feel like he understood her struggle more than anyone else. She stared at him, unsure of what to say next. There was something reassuring about his presence, something that calmed her nerves. She wasn't sure if it was his words, or simply the fact that someone was willing to listen, but for the first time that day, she felt like things might be okay. He smiled softly, as if he could read her thoughts. "I know it feels like everything is falling apart right now, but sometimes the universe has a funny way of guiding us. You're doing the right thing, even if others don't understand it." Mrs. Thompson felt a tear slip down her cheek before she could stop it. She quickly wiped it away, embarrassed. Keanu leaned forward slightly. "You've got a big heart. That's something most people can't say. Don't let anyone take that away from you." Mrs. Thompson was quiet for a moment, taking in his words. Could it really be that simple? Could she keep doing what she believed in, even if the world didn't always agree? As if answering her question, Keanu added, "If you keep doing good, no matter what happens, good things will find their way back to you." For the first time in what felt like forever, Mrs. Thompson felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things weren't over. Maybe this was just the beginning of something new. Mrs. Thompson woke up the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose. Her conversation with Keanu the day before had sparked something inside her. It was as though the weight of her defeat had been lifted, replaced by a sense of possibility. She had always been someone who believed in helping others, but she'd never fully understood how far that kindness could go until now. After all, it wasn't just about buying a student lunch. It was about showing up for someone when no one else did. It was about making a difference in a world that seemed to have forgotten the value of small gestures. Keanu had reminded her of that. He had reminded her that kindness wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. As she got dressed and prepared for the day, Mrs. Thompson realized that her life wasn't over. Far from it. In fact, she felt like she was just getting started. She didn't know where this journey would take her, but she was ready to face whatever came next. She wasn't alone anymore. Keanu had told her that good things would find their way back to her, and somehow, she believed him. As she left her apartment and stepped onto the street, Mrs. Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that she was being led towards something important. She wasn't sure if it was destiny or just the power of belief, but she felt like she was about to encounter something that would change her life forever. What could she do now with everything she had learned from the people around her, from the students she had taught, and from the kindness of a stranger like Keanu? As the day went on, things began to fall into place. Mrs. Thompson found herself networking with former colleagues, people she had worked with in the past, who had always respected her dedication to her students. They were willing to help her get back on her feet, whether it was through job leads or advice on how to make an impact outside of the classroom. But it was Keanu's words that continued to echo in her mind. Don't let anyone take away your kindness. And that was exactly what she had to hold on to. Because kindness, true unconditional kindness, had always been the heart of her journey, and she wasn't going to let that part of herself be silenced. By the end of the day, Mrs. Thompson had found a new path. It wasn't what she expected, but it was the right one for her. Keanu hadn't just given her advice, he had given her a second chance to keep being the person she had always been, and that was something worth fighting for. And now, with new opportunities on the horizon, she was ready to face whatever came next, with hope, with courage, and with the knowledge that kindness always had a way of coming full circle. A week had passed since Mrs. Thompson's encounter with Keanu, and her life had already begun to change. She found herself waking up each morning with a clearer sense of direction, a strength she hadn't felt in a long time. The weight of losing her job still lingered, but it was no longer suffocating. Instead, it had transformed into something more, a catalyst for a new chapter. Keanu's words, spoken with such quiet conviction, played over and over in her mind. Good things will find their way back to you. How could she ignore that? Was it possible that everything she had gone through, the struggles, the challenges, even the loss, had led her to this moment of clarity? She had spent years pouring herself into her work, giving everything she had to her students, but in doing so, she had forgotten to take care of herself. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe it was time to put that same care into something new. Sitting at her kitchen table one morning, she reflected on her past decisions, her passion for teaching, and the way she had always sought to do good. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how much she still had to offer. She didn't need a classroom to continue making a difference. Keanu had reminded her that kindness and action could go beyond the walls of a school. She knew what she needed to do. Mrs. Thompson opened her laptop and began searching for opportunities, not just jobs, but ways to keep helping students, even if it meant doing it outside the traditional teaching role. She found several organizations focused on providing resources for underprivileged students, offering mentorship and support. It was exactly what she had been looking for. With a sense of excitement she hadn't felt in years, Mrs. Thompson crafted an email to one of these organizations, offering her services as a mentor, a guide, someone who could provide the support students like James needed. As soon as she hit send, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. It wasn't a job, not exactly, but it was a way to make a difference, a way to keep doing what she loved, helping others. And as she read over the email one last time, she smiled. This wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. Her life was transforming, and the possibilities seemed endless. All it took was a shift in perspective. Keanu's words had given her the clarity to see it. The world needed more people willing to give without expecting anything in return. The universe, it seemed, had a funny way of leading people exactly where they needed to be. With her heart full and her mind focused, Mrs. Thompson stepped into her new path, ready for whatever came next. She wasn't just a teacher, she was a force for good. Months later, Mrs. Thompson found herself standing before a group of eager students, not in a classroom, but in a community centre where she now volunteered her time. She had become a mentor, guiding students from tough backgrounds, just like James, helping them find their strength, their voice, and most importantly, their worth. Her journey hadn't been easy, and she still faced challenges. The sting of losing her job had never fully disappeared, but something had shifted in her. She no longer felt the need for validation from others, especially not from an institution that didn't understand her values. Her work now was about genuine connection, about making an impact in the lives of young people who needed it most. Keanu's impact on her life had been profound. He had shown her that kindness wasn't something to be measured or rewarded, but something to be lived. It was about actions, not accolades. And in choosing to live by that principle, Mrs. Thompson had found peace. Her work wasn't about recognition, it was about seeing the potential in every student, no matter their circumstances, and helping them see it too. Her heart had healed from the loss, and in its place was a newfound sense of fulfillment. The people she helped now gave her the joy she had once hoped for in her career. She had become the kind of person Keanu had talked about, the kind of person who does good simply because it's the right thing to do. And as Mrs. Thompson looked out at the students she now mentored, she felt a deep sense of pride. Her journey had brought her here, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Keanu had shown her the way, but it was her own heart that had carried her forward. Her life was no longer defined by a classroom, a job, or a title. It was defined by the people she touched, the difference she made, and the knowledge that she had chosen to live her truth, no matter the obstacles. As she closed her eyes for a moment, her heart full, she couldn't help but feel immense gratitude. Keanu had been right. Kindness always found its way back, even when it seemed like the world had turned its back on you. She had found her path, and it was more beautiful than she could have ever imagined. If you enjoyed this story and want more heartwarming tales like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an uplifting story, an uplifting story, an uplifting story, an uplifting